Hello and welcome to Big Lee's Miniature Adventures, home of the Quarantined Wargamer. I'm Big Lee, and today I want to discuss why I think banning photography in museums is stupid. So back in November last year I did a video about why I thought museums were worth their weight in reference books. And I touched briefly on the fact that I had written about photography bans and why I didn't think they were a good idea, but there wasn't time really to sort of expand upon that in that particular video, and I promised to come back to it, so here we are. So why would I think that an article or a video on photography bans in museums, why would it be relevant to us gamers? Well, partly because I've already established that I think that museums and the ability to take reference photographs in museums is really, really important. But also because it's a really unique way in which a lot of people will engage with a museum artifacts and information and the images that they see there, that perhaps that they might not necessarily want to read all of the information in the small print up on the boards, but they will engage with a particular artifact and see it visually, almost like an artist would see something. They would see the detail and absorb themselves in a particular artifact and the story that comes from that. So everybody has a different way of engaging with the information they're presented with, and when you shut down a complete avenue for one group of people, you undermine the core principles of a museum. Now, the reason museums exist, firstly to conserve artifacts or information, and secondly to educate. And when you stop people being able to engage with artifacts and learn through their particular medium, in this case photography, you undermine that second principle of a museum, that the reason for existing being education. So I do very firmly believe that banning photography in museums is not a good idea, just from the general principle of undermining a museum's core mission, but also from a gamer and a modeller's perspective, because I want those reference photos. I find that they're the way in which I can take that information that I've seen at a museum and translate it into the models and stuff that I use on my table. Now, photography is a fairly universal thing these days, but actually since the dawn of time, human beings have wanted to visually record their environment and what they're doing in it, whether that's a cave painting through to art on canvas through to photography. And ever since photography itself has been invented, people have been using that medium to go out there and take pictures of the real world and them in it. The selfie isn't a modern phenomenon. It's existed pretty much since the dawn of photography. It's just become more universal and easier to do now when everyone has a camera in their pocket. And indeed, you've only got to look at the statistics to see that sharing photographs is actually extremely popular. Over 1 trillion images, digital images, are shared on social media every year. 1 trillion. That is an incredible number of pictures. So, having established that photography is fairly universal, it has to be said, why do museums and other institutions ban photography? So the most common reason given, the one that I've come across most, is that photography violates copyright protections. Copyright, in a sense, identifies the creator of a work, protecting their intellectual property of the author. It ensures the creator is paid when their work is reproduced. So that's the purpose of copyright. And technically it lasts for the artist's life plus 70 years. That varies in some countries, but that's the general standard across most countries. But ultimately, what most people don't realise is museums don't own the copyright of loaned items. That still resides with the original owner or artist that produced that piece of work, whether that's a sculpture, painting or a photograph. And historical artefacts aren't subject to copyright. Now obviously if that artifact is a photograph, that would do, but a piece of equipment, for instance, you can't have copyright on a piece of military equipment or a uniform. So that argument doesn't bear out when it comes to those particular items. And most museums get around this by asking that pictures are allowed, but not for commercial purposes. and then of course it's up to the owner of the intellectual property to enforce their copyright, not necessarily the museum or the institution. So when they say that they're protecting copyright, it's not actually their role to do so. My view is that the only people affected by a ban to photography are those people who would play by the rules. Because there's plenty of people, you go around, I've been around to museums where photography is banned, and I will follow the rules because that's what they've said. And I've entered in the full knowledge of their rules, and then I'll see somebody else taking a quick photograph. And like I say, when you've got cameras on every phone, it's so easy to take pictures. You know, the only people that end up losing out are those of us that actually follow the rules. And to be honest, it's so much easier these days. If an institution genuinely really wanted to enforce their copyright, it's so much easier now because you can do online image searches to show the origin of photographs and so on. So it is a lot easier these days to enforce that sort of copyright if they decided they wanted to. But many institutions don't. So it begs the question, why do they impose that ban in the first place if they actually have no real intention of following up on that copyright? Another routine excuse used by institutions who, let's face it, they're always short of funding. Doesn't matter whether they're the big national museums or smaller collections, they're all short of funding. It's just a reality, particularly after the last 12 months. Is that photography reduces income. You know, there's a reason why the exit to the museum is always through the shop. They want you to buy their postcards and their books and so on. So you know, that's fine. That's a good way of a museum increasing their revenue. But they will argue that if we ban photography, people are more likely to buy those items. They argue that there's lost revenue because they don't sell as many reproductions or guidebooks. However, many museums do allow photography, and their shops seem just as busy as normal. There's no end of pointless stuff being sold in museum shops, toot as we like to call it. You know, so they obviously don't have a problem. Some museums have decided that it isn't an issue, and also there's usually, if you go on a museum's website, you can nearly always find high resolution photographs of some of their items, particularly if they've got a collection they want to advertise. And let's face it, you just go right click and download a copy and you've got a picture. So why not allow you to take one for yourself? As I say, taking that picture yourself is your emotional connection to a particular place or event or an object in this case. And I do think that museums are fighting a losing battle because there's high quality cameras, as I've mentioned, in everybody's pocket these days. Now, a solution to this possibly, as I'm quite happy to pay for a photography permit. I've done that in a couple of places, particularly some churches and some small museums, a nominal fee, and you pay for a photography permit, not a parking permit, so that you can take some pictures, providing you use them for non-commercial use. Quite happy with that. A little bit of extra revenue for the museum, I've got no problem with doing that myself. The advantage of a permit system is that it enables the museum to make it absolutely crystal clear to the person who's going to take the photographs what their policies are, i.e. you can take pictures but not for commercial use. You can't take pictures in these particular areas. To a certain extent, these part permit systems will help museums offset lower revenue in the shops, or indeed higher insurance costs, but we'll come back to that in a little bit. Another reason that I have come across, particularly in country houses where they have old textiles or furniture, is that flash can damage the exhibits. Now, I'm not sure on the science on this. You know, flash cameras don't produce UV, so I don't see how that can actually damage an item, but we'll assume that they're correct because I'm not a scientist, I don't know that. However, it has to be said that modern cameras, even cameras on phones, are much better at working in low light, so you don't necessarily need to use a flash. So you could just a simple ban on flash photography completely negates that concern. You know, I've been to plenty of museums where they don't allow flash photography, but I can take perfectly reasonable photographs in low light because my camera can cope with that. And providing you've got the right techniques for holding your camera and all the rest, you can get a good stable photograph. I've not had a problem with taking pictures in low light circumstances in these places. So just banning flash photography is quite okay. And the other reason I think that it's almost a self-defeating argument, because you go to these sort of country houses and these fancy places where you've got delicate textiles or plasterwork or whatever it might be, is that often photographs are used by conservators to restore items, and usually what they do is they put out a request to the public: does anyone have photographs of this particular country house or this particular room? And then all these photographs pile in, and then conservators use them to actually do restorations. So banning photography entirely in these particular locations can actually damage conservation efforts. So I do think it's a slightly counterintuitive argument to use. Another reason that is often used is that photography is part of their crime prevention policies. There's a perceived security risk from criminals or terrorists, or that insurance might be increased if there isn't a photography ban in place. Now, I don't know if that's true, but it does sound very plausible that the insurance companies might charge more if you allow photography for certain types of collections. But as mentioned earlier, a permit system could be used to offset some of those costs. I'm pretty sure that the dedicated art thief can find ways around a security ban, as could your average jihadi. I mean, let's face it, wearable spy cameras are available on Amazon, for crying out loud. So again, the only people that end up losing out are those people that play by the rules and don't have nefarious purposes in mind when they take their pictures. Another popular reason used by museums is that more photographs online means fewer people will turn up as visitors. But of course, I personally think that particular argument has been completely blown out of the water by lockdown, because all of the museums that I have subscriptions to or are on their mailing list have been sending out loads of information. I mean, the British Museum, for example, my wife and I joined so that we could go to special exhibits literally a few weeks before lockdown hit in the UK, and we've not been. We only had to use our subscription, our membership of the British Museum once, right at the beginning before lockdown came into place. And so we've not got our money's worth out of our membership. But what we've been receiving is a big glossy magazine a couple of times a year, and every few weeks I'm getting an email with lovely photographs in it of new exhibitions, or focusing on current on artifacts that are already there. Some really good online exhibitions. But of course, that completely blows out of the water any argument about pictures reducing viewer numbers. Now, of course, the British Museum doesn't ban photography, but other institutions do use that as an excuse for banning photography. I mean, I've been to dozens of little museums that I've seen because I've seen somebody else's photographs and discovered a museum that I didn't know about. So as I said right at the beginning of this, the primary purpose of a museum is to preserve and to educate. If they remain an obscure collection, ultimately it harms their core purpose. What is the point of opening it all if you don't want people to know that you even exist? The last reason given, and again, one that often comes up, is that photography is antisocial. Now, you often find that galleries, for instance, will ban photography because they say that it damages the enjoyment of other people's viewing, which I understand to a certain extent. If you're going to allow people to bring tripods, selfie sticks and flash, they're all very intrusive techniques and equipment that can be used in a setting. In some museums, like a vehicle museum for instance, it ain't going to bother anyone, but in an art gallery it would. So you just ban those items as far as I'm concerned. Let's face it, people can be antisocial without any equipment, without a camera in their hand. And again, banning photography just targets one particular group of people. I mean, obviously we should always be courteous to other museum users when you're out there. I mean, I went to an exhibition last year. Was it last year or was it the year before? I'm totally losing track of time. A Troy exhibition at the British Museum, and I wanted to take photographs, but it took me about 4 times as long as everyone else to get around the exhibit, because I kept waiting until there was a suitable gap in the crowd so I could take pictures without interfering with other people. And there was an older couple who were getting right up and on top of the artifacts, completely blocking the line of sight of everybody around them. They didn't have a camera, but instead of standing back and reading the information or looking at the artifact like everyone else was doing, they got right up the front. So they were being very antisocial, and there wasn't a camera in sight. So just banning photography doesn't stop people from being antisocial in a gallery or a special exhibition. I'd also say it's worth, as well as equipment, turn off the sound settings on your camera. Last thing people want to do in a nice quiet art gallery, for instance, to hear your camera beeping because you're trying to autofocus. And it's easy enough. Most cameras allow you to do it, so just turn off the sound settings. So I'm very aware that this video has probably gone on a lot longer than I normally do, so I'm going to wrap it up now. So most museums do not impose photography bans, and those that do are in a small minority. My experience is that bans are obviously legacy policies that haven't really taken into account modern cameras and changing needs and desires of the audience that they're asking to come in and look at their exhibits. It can often make some visitors feel very unwelcome, and it's also hard to enforce. I mean, why would you want to be a volunteer in a museum with a photography ban and then have to go around telling people to put that camera away when they're allowed to take pictures absolutely anywhere else? It's not. I don't think it fits in with a museum's educational remit. But as always, I would say I would love to hear your views, your experiences. Have you ever been to a museum that's banned photography and given some lame-ass excuse, frankly, for why they don't allow it? Do you agree with them? Do you disagree with them? What do you think about my arguments and conversation here? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. I appreciate that this video's gone on a little bit longer than normal, but I hope you've enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, as always, please hit the like and subscribe button, and of course share if you can. So until next week, stay safe, get as many games in as you can, and of course, keep rolling high.